Hello, my name is Rachel and I'm a professional artist and disciple of Jesus Christ. Drawing trees can sometimes be a little overwhelming. There's a lot to them. There's an underlying structure of the trunk and branches as well as all of the leaves, and sometimes it's hard to know where to start.
Using mixed media that includes both dry drawing components and wet painting components can be a great way to make drawing a tree more manageable. All three drawings that I'm going to show you in this lesson, going through the whole time lapse and everything, were begun outside and then later finished inside of my studio. Working outside gives you way more information about the actual tree and seeing details that you might not think of if you were just looking at a photo or working from your imagination. It also sometimes forces you to think on your feet and make quick decisions. For this reason, I'm going to use artistic media that involve both dry and wet components. The first one is Tombow markers, which have both a brush tip and a smaller felt tip. I'm going to use a general sketch and wash pencil, which is graphite, Derwent Inktense. So both of these kind of pencils and these markers can be turned into watercolor when they get wet, for which reason I'll bring not only my sharpener but also my paintbrushes and water cup with me outside. I'm using a Canson XL mixed media sketchbook because this paper will be thicker than your average sketchbook paper to be able to hold the wet media better. First, I'm going to draw a pine tree focusing on the trunk. I'm going to use Derwent Inktense pencils for the trunk, and then I'm going to use Tombow markers for the green leaves. I'm starting off by using straight lines to map out the branches of the tree, paying attention to how they fit together. I'm using an Inktense pencil, which will turn into ink when wet. These pencils don't erase easily, so I'm just going to work with what I've done and keep it loose. Next, I'm holding my pencil on the side and creating shading. I'm keeping those diagonal lines, generally going the same direction and going heavier in areas where it gets a little bit darker. But mostly I just want to show where the basic light and shadows are on the tree. Then I'm starting to go over some of the edge lines for emphasis, as well as to make them a little bit more curved and organic rather than just the plain straight line. After which point I'll start to have something that looks reasonably like the tree. Now I'm breaking out my water and I'm just gently going over. You can see that the ink is actually pretty strong, so even though I drew fairly lightly, it's coming out dark. I'm also adding more water and spreading that ink out even into the areas that are lighter just to get a light wash over there. You can see that as I start to get to the smaller branches, it gets a little bit tricky, and I could have chosen to use a smaller paintbrush at this point, but I'm just keeping the whole painting loose. I've left some areas a little bit dry just for texture and effect. Now I'm going in with a Tombow brush marker and doing some green in the background. I'm using, a slightly different material than the Inktense pencil, but if you even had a different color of the same water-soluble material, you could use that as well. I'm using both sides of my marker, both the big and small, and then I'm drawing in some of the trees that I can see in the distance as well, just keeping them really loose just to add a little bit more to my background. At this point, I stopped working on this picture, at least for the outside part. Later, I went back inside and I kept working on it a little bit more in my studio space. I went over with additional water, just making some parts even darker, really amping up that contrast for three-dimensional effect. In some parts, I even made small strokes with my water in order to create more texture on the tree. This is my finished painting. I could have taken it even further if I wished, but I like just keeping it loose while still having that clear shadow structure and texture. During my day at the park, I moved on and chose a new tree. This one is tall and had several different colors of leaves on it at the moment. I used a sketch and wash pencil to create the trunk and then the Tombow markers in various colors to create the leaves. First, I mapped out some of the different sections of leaves with just straight lines. This was a little bit different than before because I was looking more at the leaves than at the underlying structure. Then I started quickly coming in and just loosely playing around with markers and layering those over top to create the effect of the leaves. Then I went back and found the branch structure that was underneath them. This was as far as I took it while I was outside. I didn't spend as much time on it during my outdoor session as I did on the previous drawing. When I brought this drawing back to the studio, I started going over it with some thin lines around the edges just to emphasize different areas. and fill in some of the background leaves, make it a little bit more intense. So I'm adding darkness, I'm adding a little bit more just oomph to those leaves. My cat also was interrupting me a little bit, but I just kept going. And then I put some brown marker even over top of that pencil mark just to make it a little bit more brown and natural. This ended up being the most abstract of my 3 drawings, but even though I could have gone into greater detail, I think this still captures the essence of the tree. The final tree that I drew during this session was more green and squat with just a few leaves turning red in certain places. I again used the Sketch and Wash pencil to create the trunk, and then I used mostly green markers with a little bit of red for the leaves. I decided to hold my paper horizontally this time, accommodating the more short and wide nature of this tree. After I finished mapping it out with straight lines, I started adding a light green over top and then a slightly darker green and making those wet in order to spread the colors around, and then just adding red in a few spots around it. When I finished my outdoor drawing session, this drawing was still pretty light and airy. Afterwards, I went back into the studio and I really amped up the dark a lot, emphasizing those areas in which some of the branch sections were kind of popping forth more than others, and creating more texture by varying using the thick side and the thin side of my marker. I went back and forth between using water and adding more leaf texture using my marker. And of course, my cat still made an appearance. Finally, I beefed up the highlights with a lighter green color. And here's my final drawing, which ended up being the most detailed of the 3. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more drawing and painting videos, as well as content about Christian discipleship as an artist. See you next time.